This is an ODB Films production. Visit odbfilms.com today.
In Latin, Renovo means to renew, restore, or revive. This show is all about growing in our understanding and practice of faith. Past episodes are available wherever you like to listen to podcasts. I'm Doug Tuke, the Vice President of Ministry Advancement at ODB Films, and today we look at the Freemasons. That's right, Harvey Keitel's secret organization in Nicolas Cage's National Treasure, which is how most of you know what the Freemasons are, unless you went to prom at a Masonic temple. I don't know. Maybe you are a Mason. I have no idea. All I know is that it has a weird relationship with Catholicism, and I want to get to the bottom of it and chat it out as quickly as possible, right? So lots of Catholics, we view Freemasonry as kind of dangerous, sometimes even satanic, actually. It's like a conspiracy founded to destroy the faith, and that's kind of weird. On the other hand, the craft, as it likes to be called, the craft likes to present itself as a, quote, ancient order dedicated to the brotherhood of man and the fatherhood of God. And some of the brethren, the brothers, the participants, they may take that description kind of seriously, depending on which room, which division of the Masonic organization they inhabit. But the lodge has a lot of different rooms, a lot of different suites, annexes, outbuildings, whose participants are not necessarily fraternal towards each other, much less towards God. And that's what we want to talk about in the show because it's got a ton of cool details. So the basic unit of quote-unquote like regular Freemasonry is the Blue Lodge or craft, which quote-unquote works or imparts the three traditional degrees: entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master. So initiation is the main business of a local Masonic temple. Members learn grips and signs and rituals. They reenact their central myth, the death and the resurrection of Hiram Abiff, Hiram-Abiff, Hiram Abiff, the legendary builder of Solomon's Temple. With one exception, American local lodges are actually grouped in state grand lodges that are recognized by the Mother Lodge, which is in London. So Master Masons' wives can join the Order of the Eastern Star, their daughters, Job's daughters, or the Order of the Rainbow for girls, and then their sons, the Order of the Demolay, D-E-M-O-L-A-Y. Now you know. So there's a zealous minority of Anglo-American Masons that acquire like additional degrees, teaching kind of these more sort of sophisticated symbols in these separate organizations that are called appendant bodies that are not controlled by the Mother Lodge. I know you're probably getting lost in all this, but it's fascinating. These are these sort of different rites within American Anglo-Masonry. Something to know. Mostly white Anglo-Protestant organization, although we'll talk a little bit about sort of a Black African subsect and whatnot. But anyway, the little bodies, the York Rite, the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, they are all kind of broken up into different jurisdictions, and it's all just kind of different and does all kinds of different stuff. So holders of the highest degrees in either rite are eligible basically to join the ancient Arabic order of the nobles of the mystic shrine, which are Shriners, which are designated for philanthropy and kind of fun, riding little cars in parades and providing wonderful children's hospitals. So Shriners are a specific order of master masons. Now you know. Okay, let's get into the history. Let's get into some more detail here. Anyway, the craft, okay, it started in the British Isles, and the overwhelming majority of all of its members actually still live in English-speaking countries specifically. So according to the Masonic Service Association, there are about 1.2 million Freemasons in the United States, which is down from a high of 4 million in 1958. Isn't that amazing? So far fewer men in Latin countries belong to what's called the Grand Orient system. It's a separate system whose components are not usually recognized by the Mother Lodge in London. And then even fewer still practice forms of sort of fringe masonry, such as co-masonry, which enrolls both men and women. Prince Hall lodges, originally for Black African men, are actually generally considered irregular by American Masons. Like, they're not even acknowledged. There's a reason for that, and we'll talk about it later on. So to see why the Catholic Church has sort of strongly, not even sort of, I mean has strongly and repeatedly condemned membership in Freemasonry or any of its movements, any of its allied movements, we got to take a look at the teachings. You got to understand what the teachings are and how they kind of happen in history. So Freemasons pretend to preserve ancient secrets handed down from Solomon's builders and pagan mystery cults via the medieval Knights Templar. Some have even identified like Adam, Noah, and St. John the Evangelist as brother Masons. So that's fairly astronomical. But anyway, the craft claims to offer quote-unquote light, unobtainable anywhere else, that will perfect the initiate, the member, and improve society. So their foremost, the most popular modern commentator, Henry Wilson Coyle, he describes Freemasonry as a system of morality and social ethics, a primitive religion, and a philosophy of life. That would be how he describes his own organization. But the real origin of the craft, as even Masonic historians now admit, like this isn't like it's return conspiracy. This is what history books teach. It actually lies in the Renaissance, sort of this esotericism philosophy that was injected into all kinds of traditions that were developed by medieval stoneworkers. So it was kind of spurred by interest into these sort of symbolic possibilities of architecture, looking at buildings and seeing their symbols beyond the intentions of the architect. And folks that were not professional stonemasons, they were actually called non-operatives, they began to join workmen's lodges, almost like these unions in Scotland in the 1590s. And these fellowships had just been like turned into like permanent organizations by the king's chief builder in Scotland, who was a Catholic named William Shaw, S-C-H-A-W. There's a great book. Professor David Stevenson wrote a really kind of amazing history. It's called The Origins of Freemasonry, Scotland's Century, 1590 to 1710. Check it out. Wrote it in 1988. Anyway, so lodges of the non-operative, so these are the non-professional, these are the laborers. These non-operative Freemasons appeared in England, inspired from Scotland, in the 1640s, and they actually attracted nobility and like the intellectuals of all these different kinds of religions to the craft, to these men's groups. In 1717, 4 London lodges united as the Grand Lodge of England, which issued constitutions in 1723 and became the mother lodge, like we talked about, of all regular Masons. So spreading throughout the world, Freemasonry reached the continent by 1721, and then America basically by 1730. Exiled Scottish supporters of the Catholic Stuarts brought Masonry to France, where it proved really popular among aristocrats and kind of the philosophes that were receptive to the Enlightenment at the time. So the lodge's initial appeal was a place for guys of different faiths to socialize and speculate in peace. Discuss religion and politics was forbidden. You were not allowed to talk about faith, not allowed to talk about politics. Interesting. Haydn, famous guy. Mozart, famous guy. Lots of other celebrities. They actually joined. It was a place to chat and drink and not get into the things that are difficult to talk about, like politics and religion. But avoiding sectarian disputes, it kind of pushed Freemasonry towards this very vague kind of mere deism. So it seldom mentioned God was the great architect of the universe, reachable by reason alone. Does that make sense? So belief in a supreme being and the immortality of the soul was all that was required of 18th century regular Freemasons. Very sort of just simple, there's a God, we're connected, we get to know him with our brains. There it is, right? So English and Northern European Freemasonry retained these sort of vague beliefs and functioned as, a lowest common denominator religion, quote, in which all men agree, right? Sort of vague, lukewarm. They even displayed the Bible in their meetings during their rituals as the volume of the sacred law, interesting enough. So they were staunch supporters of the prevailing social establishment. Until recently, they dominated politics, the professions, the military, finance, and even the police. So prior to Prince Charles in England, lots of English royals were keen Masons, as were some Anglican bishops. Isn't that amazing? Martin Short wrote a book, Inside the Brotherhood, Further Secrets of the Freemasons. It's a really good survey of kind of their influence in the United Kingdom. During the American Revolution, more Masons were loyalists than patriots, but these did include some of the founding fathers, such as Washington, Franklin, Hancock, Hamilton, Monroe. John Adams, however, he denounced it publicly. He denounced Masonry, the craft. And surprisingly, Freemasonry also enrolled Daniel Carroll, one of only 2 Catholics at the Constitutional Convention, brother of America's first bishop, Archbishop John Carroll of Baltimore, and then cousin of Charles Carroll, the only Catholic who signed the Declaration of Independence. So in Carroll's defense, we'll talk about this later, but like the papal condemnations of Freemasonry hadn't even really been officially proclaimed in America, so they had no idea. Anyway, in the 1826 disappearance of a New York man who had revealed secrets of Masonry, of the craft, it sparked a brief kind of outburst of this sort of anti-Masonic feeling, but then the lodge were sort of soon popular again. Again, just men's clubs, places to gather. So over the course of the 19th and the early 20th centuries, American Catholics suffered from the craft's hostility as American Freemasons turned basically nativist and anti-Catholic. Remember, and we did a show on this, on like early immigration, a lot of Catholicism came from immigrants. The Masons would have been the I was born here Americans and had no use for any kind of Italian, Irish, Polish, good grief, all over the place. You know, all of the German Americans, all the influences that were coming over from Europe. They were just like, no, get out of here. They were conspicuous in both kind of the original and actually the developed, revived Ku Klux Klan. There's a ton of Mason roots in KKK activity and still is, which is gross and awful. And remember this, the Knights of Columbus, founded by Father Michael J. McGivney in 1882, it was designed to offer Catholics an alternative to the Masonic Lodge, to the craft, interesting enough. So American Masons came to hold these sort of disproportionate positions of power at all levels of government, including the presidency, Congress, the Supreme Court. They led the fight against parochial schools, and they demanded absolute separation of church and state. I don't know where you are politically on that, but that was really born out of kind of a Masonic agenda. Tons of networks of influence among Masons really stifled competition from any kind of outsiders in business and any other professions. You know, those networks, like we have today, people do business with people they know. So lodge membership became a badge of sort of middle-class Protestant respectability at the peak of its popularity in the 1920s to 1960s. Interesting. So, meanwhile, the Grand Orient lodges of France, Iberia, and Latin America were building a way more grim anti-Catholic network. They attracted men that were totally hostile, both to church and state, and who found Masonic structures and secrecy really useful for political subversion. So Masons were really prominent in the French Revolution and the Irish Rising of 1798, which is amazing. They helped lead the South American revolts against Spain, as well as the unification of Italy, discarding really in that era, discarding even the pretense of deism. Grand Orient lodges, they stopped revering the Bible or any kind of volume of sacred law. They dominated the anti-clerical French Third Republic, 1870 to 1940, that was responsible for confiscating all church property in France. They also persecuted and slaughtered Catholics after the Mexican Revolution and during the Spanish Civil War. So even in today's European Union, the Masons favor a sort of radical secularization, just radical, right? Just eliminate it, right? Which is gross. So outraged by all these activities, conspiracy-minded Catholics, we've claimed that there are, it's part of a Judeo-Masonic plot that also created communism. And there's a book by the prolific Irish priest, Father Dennis Fahey, called The Kingdom of Christ and Organized Naturalism, 1943. It's kind of typical of that voice and that material. And what's argued by that conspiracy-minded Catholic is that Old Testament references and Hebrew words and lodge rituals prove sort of Jewish origins of the craft, But we know that that's not true at all, so it's kind of a weird conspiracy. The founders of Freemasonry were Christian Scots, and its constitutions were prepared by a Protestant clergyman, so there's really nothing to go there. But anyway, not only is Marxism an entirely different entity, communist regimes have always suppressed Masonry. Hitler did, Mussolini did, so the fascists did, that's for sure. The craft could be criticized as sort of an influence or a template for kind of a theosophy, kind of some themes in New Age thought and kind of like Wicca, but, not communism. It just doesn't work. So fear of Judeo-Masonry and it's like, it really kind of messes up the way that we look at its flaws, which are more philosophical, which is this: relativism and naturalism. That's really the flaws. Blue Lodge Freemasonry treats all religions alike, but they're all inferior to the quote unquote light that it offers to its select brethren. So that's the challenge there. That's the problem that the church has with it, among other things. They trust reason alone, not supernatural revelations. But Christians believe that salvation comes from the real life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, not some dubious legend of Hiram Abiff, Solomon's builder. That's just not working. Furthermore, the high degrees of Masonry, of all the different kind of bodies, what are called the appendant bodies, are actually just outright blasphemous. The Royal Arch degree of the York Rite of Masonry reveals that the true name of God is Jabulan, which is a fusion of the Hebrew Yahweh with the names of pagan gods Baal and Osiris. That's just wacky. The Scottish Rite's 18th degree, Rose Croix is what it's called. It reinterprets the cross and the INRI inscription above it as pagan symbols. So a candidate for the 13th degree, Knight Kadosh, they actually have to trample the papal tiara, crying out loud, "Down with the imposture." So you can see where there's a problem, right? The initiate, that person that's receiving that right, they vow to propagate light and overthrow what they call superstition, fanaticism, imposture, and intolerance, which are all, identified with Christianity. That's kind of weird, especially Catholic Christianity. So the best Catholic apologetics works that talk about Freemasonry is a book called Christianity and American Freemasonry. Ignatius Press put it out there. It's by William J. Whalen. It's worth it if you're interested in finding out more. So from the time that Freemasonry penetrated Europe, the Catholic Church basically watched it and warned against it. Pretty much all the way back to the beginning. In 1738, Pope Clement XII condemned the craft for its reliance on just, natural virtue and totally ignoring Christ, Christ's role as our Savior specifically. Pope Clement also denounced sort of the rash, blood-curdling oaths that were demanded of members to protect these sort of trivial lodge secrets, which is just kind of weird. And ironically, those precious secrets are anything but secret. They're not really secret. They're all kind of out there now, so it's not even a big deal. All the details have been revealed numerous times. There's a book by an ex-Mason, Walter Hanna, called Darkness Visible, A Christian Appraisal of Freemasonry. Basically just kind of tells you all the things that are going on. Pope Clement decreed that Catholics who joined the Masons were excommunicated, just straight up, with reconciliation reserved only for the Pope. Like, you are a Mason, you're out, you want to become Catholic again, you better chalk with the Pope. Unfortunately, this didn't have much effect because the rule was not really published in every country, nor was it even taken seriously where it was published because it seemed outlandish. But 8 subsequent popes have actually had to repeat the message. Most forcefully was Pope Leo XIII in his 1884 encyclical Humanum Genus, basically denouncing the lodge as, quote, a deceitful and crafty enemy. Pope Leo declared, quote, "Let no man think that he may for any reason whatsoever join the Masonic sect if he values his Catholic name and his eternal salvation as he ought to value them." That's a bold statement, right? So the stern, super stern prohibition was included in the 1917 Code of Canon Law and was taught as such. So after the Second Vatican Council, however, the long kind of antagonism between the church and the lodge seemed like it was kind of lightening up. There was sort of a reinterpretation of the anti-Masonic canons in 1974, and it really led a lot of Catholics to basically think that only Masonic groups that were actively plotting against the church were forbidden to them. Again, it was just men's clubs, social men's clubs. for a lot of people. And that's bad timing in terms of teaching, because some notable Freemasons had been conspiring actually against the Vatican through its bank. This is a real thing that happened. In March of 1981, two of Pope Paul VI's top financial advisors, known all along as Masons, were unmasked as members of a secret lodge called Propaganda 2, or P2, that was preparing a fascist takeover of Italy. It was a big political conspiracy, and both men later died mysteriously, thought to be murdered. And the Vatican lost $240 million with the collapse of its bank, if you can believe that. Unbelievable. So the P2 Lodge was a scam on Italian Grand Orient Masonry, as well as the church. It was sort of it was like a fringe subject group. Had 953 members, unbelievable, including high-ranking members of government, the military, security services, academia, business, law, media, and finance. None were churchmen, none of them. They were all just kind of this little subsect thing. So, although an argument from silence does not completely debunk the existence of this sort of ecclesiastical masonry theory, it's a monster. It's dear to Italians and to radical traditionalists, that this evidence is pretty suggestive. Like there might be, it's just, these things have been discovered. It's kind of creepy. Coincidentally or otherwise, whatever, Rome had already been having second thoughts about all those things just before the P2 scandal broke. Local bishops had been warned in 1981 that they had no authority to judge the character of local Masonic associations and relax the old strictures. They were told this is not good. Although the new Code of Canon Law that came out in 1983, it did not mention the craft or similar groups by name. Pope Benedict XVI, then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, he reiterated the old ban on 26 November 1983. He said this: "The Church's negative position on Masonic associations therefore remains unaltered, since their principles have always been regarded as irreconcilable with the Church's doctrine." And Saint Pope John Paul II ordered this rule incorporated into church law. So the bishops of the United States reported the same conclusion in 1985, that you cannot be a Catholic and a Freemason. It's irreconcilable. Interesting. Lots of other Christian bodies also condemn Freemasonry, including many Lutherans, evangelicals, Pentecostals, Baptists, and Orthodox followers of the Holy Synod of Greece. Even Latter-day Saints, Mormons, originally influenced by Masonry, condemn it to this day, which is fascinating. So the Catholic Church and the Lodge, it's not going to be reconciled. Freemasonry teaches a rival religion of naturalism, whether it's plotting, persecuting, blaspheming, or engaging in philanthropy, or behaves politely. It is what it is. It treats all religions as equal, but inferior to its own sort of Gnostic, secretive wisdom. And that's not going to work. So publicized understanding, how do you say this? Like just understanding that, that shadows and secrecy and secret truth are what they are, is never going to fit into Catholicism. Even after someone has taken every degree known in the Masonic mansion, they're not going to be more enlightened than when they started, but really kind of considerably further from the true light, the true great architect, is the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And that's, if that's not acknowledged or known, how could the two come together? So that's Freemasonry. It's kind of creepy. It's kind of weird. And it's all born out of social clubs, Scottish social clubs, that latched onto silly, kind of made-up traditions, but have really lasted the test of time. Not as long as the church has, not really even close, but still kind of are out there and doing their own thing. Thanks for listening. Sincerely, we are partners in the journey of faith. I hope you'll share this Renovo podcast with friends and foes. Send your topic suggestions, questions, and/or comments to doug@odbfilms.com. Always remember to engage the tradition and live the conversion. Until next time, God bless.